here we are. We're trying to do our video remotely, keeping safe and social distancing, and trying to be as wise as we can during this uncertain time. So, Dr. Hanna, tell me what do we have for today?
Well, Kyle, I came across a quote, and I want to share it, and it's something I've been thinking about over the last couple of days. The quote says, "Are you ready for this, Kyle? Because this is a heavy quote. This is kind of, yeah. It says, "We know we all will die, but we behave as if we will live forever on this earth." It's a very sobering quote. The guy who wrote it, his name is James Montgomery Boyce. James, most of you have probably not heard of James Montgomery Boyce, and if you have heard of him, that will tell me something about you. James Montgomery Boyce, believe it or not, was a preacher in Philadelphia who passed away, I believe, 20 years ago from pancreatic cancer. He was a well-known preacher in that circle in Philadelphia, and I think it's kind of a sobering insight that I came across a couple of days ago, that it's really relevant to what we're experiencing. Honestly, we're as a country, as a community, as a society, as a world, we're experiencing a lot of loss, and sooner or later, most of us are going to know somebody who is going to pass away from this, and I personally already know of several. So it's kind of a very sobering thought, and it's a thought that, frankly, even prior to this pandemic, is a thought we probably, I don't know if we would just dismiss it or if we are too busy to even reflect on that, on the brevity of our life. We've obviously always known how fragile our lives are, and I think that crises and when someone passes away close to us, it we realize it and we reflect on it, but then we move on, and I think I'm going to read it again because there's so much insight in this, where he says, "We know we all will die." Yeah, intellectually, cognitively, we know that. We know that the mortality rate has been 100% for a long time with no change, right? And and that's just, I don't say that jokingly, but that's the reality of our life, and our lives are, I think, a lot of times much shorter than we even realize, right? Our time goes by really fast. The older we get, the more we recognize that. But it's the but in the quote, but we behave as if we will live forever on this earth. And I think the whole idea that we do our life, though, and we behave as if that's not true, right? There's a disconnect with that. And I think a lot of times we're all tempted to put that thought aside because it's an unpleasant thought. It's a scary thought, right? It's a thought that perhaps grabs us in a way that can be debilitating for some. And I know for some people, it can be a paralyzing thought. And it just seems so hopeless and so kind of a downer, right? Our mortality is not something we like to sit around and talk about. But the reality is we're all being confronted with it ourselves. We're concerned about whether we get the virus or our loved ones get the virus or friends, or and people are passing away, and it's scary, and it's sad. People are losing loved ones all over the world, and the whole idea of, so then how do we live differently instead of but we behave as if we will live forever? How do we behave and live with the knowledge and understanding that this life is brief, right? And I know this leads to some kind of thoughts that go in the direction of what happens after we die. What's the point of life? And Kyle, I know you and I have had these conversations before.
Yeah.
But I just think for such a time as this, right, that we are living in, we don't have a choice but to think about this stuff. And I know that for some of you watching this, this is not a place you like to go. And it's a scary place to go. And so that's kind of where I'm at is Kyle, is where do we go? How do we think about this, without putting our heads in the sand and just hoping it doesn't affect our family or our loved ones or our friends, and just putting it aside and let's just get over this. The virus is just going to be gone. Life's going to go back to normal. Our economy is going to go back to normal. We're good. And we go back to doing what we've always done and going back to our lifestyle, right? We talked about this in a prior video, how our lifestyle tends to own us. And all we keep doing is looking forward to just getting through this. And I get that, right? This is not pleasant. This is highly unpleasant, highly difficult for many. Many are struggling. People are losing jobs. People are passing away.
Yeah.
Right. We're losing loved ones. This is hard.
Yeah. So Dr. Hanna, thank you first and foremost for sharing that quote. It definitely is a gut punch in many ways. And I love when people, authors and philosophers, theologians, people of industry, they have these sobering reflections, and they have these reflections on their own mortality. They have these reflections on their own legacy, and they really, they cause us all to think, right? And I can think of a few people. I'm thinking, quotes by Steve Jobs. I'm thinking a lot of these people that they say something and it profoundly affects you forever, right? Mm-hmm. So when I look at this whole crisis, I guess the thing that comes to mind when you read that quote was like the importance of resilience theory. So resilience is not a term that we hear all the time, but it's the ability to endure stressors. It's the ability to endure circumstances, life circumstances like the coronavirus, and be able to snap back, to bounce back, to recover with like haste or speed. And, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, specifically because when we're talking about our country, we want it to go back to the way it was.
Yep.
But I guess my honest question, or my honest, maybe just a personal response to that, is a question of, do we really want to go back to the way things were? And I say that because I've been surprised in working with patients, how many patients are really picking out not only the silver lining of these times, but actually making tremendous progress and recognizing that there's opportunities here that they had not previously seen. And I think when you look at resilience theory, it's the idea that life is going to happen. Circumstances are going to bring about opportunities for change, opportunities for reflection. So I guess where I want to start is that I don't want to see a pandemic ever. I don't want to see death. Right. I don't want to see destruction. I don't want to see any of that. My heart grieves for the loss of life and for the fact that this is existing. However, within something that I don't have power to control, I cannot change. I can make the best choices I can for myself, my family, and my work. But the big picture is, where do we go from here? What's next? And how do we get to whatever's next? And I think, as a therapist, I'm not an economist, I'm not, a political figure. And I just think about, what is it that we need to work on in our own human condition? So I think resilience. And I think what really stands out is the idea of legacy, the idea of meaning and purpose. And Dr. Hanna, if you don't mind, I'm just going to share my screen here so you can see just something that might help guide this conversation. So hopefully you can see this little graph about personal resilience.
Yep.
And from that, the first little circle there is personal mission and values. And I think this is what I first go to, is like, okay, so during this time, what is our mission? Because for my adolescent patients, their mission was to be the best player on their team, was to be the most studious, academic minded, almost in college, yet only a sophomore and high school student. But with all that's gone on, they're not on sports teams right now. They are, thriving in school because they have all this extra time to work on the projects. And for whatever reason, there's less distraction, and they're doing so well. And yet there's that uncertainty about what is my mission, what is my focus, and what do I need to work on. Just another example, this is just a different, less complex image to look at here, but it says the meaning of life, meaning in life. So mission and personal values, meaning of life, they're very much a part of resilience theory. And there's all of these other things that we could talk about.
Right.
But I guess the one that really comes up for me is like, okay, so what's our new mission? Where do we go from here? What is going to be different about our nation and different about our culture, different about our belief systems in light of this?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what comes up.
And that's the heart of it, right? Is in order to come up with a mission, in order to know what it is you're on mission for or on mission to, it's going to go to what's the foundation? What, how'd you come up with that mission? What are you pursuing and why?
Yep.
Because we know that I don't want to overstate the case, but I get the sense that as a society and as a culture, we're ill-equipped to handle what we're going through. There was a very well-known book by a guy named Neil Postman, who was a professor at NYU, and he wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's a pretty prominent book, and I don't remember honestly if it came out in the 70s or 80s, and he talks about when our mission is amusement and entertainment, it kind of leads to an inability to handle, serious situations and to be able to handle, big issues in life and to be able to manage crises and to manage when our foundations are being shaken.
Yeah.
The very foundations of our lives are being shaken. Right. And I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but we're all staying at home. Yep. We're doing this by video. We're not seeing each other in person. We're all doing remote, school and medicine and telemedicine and telepsychiatry, and people are not going to their offices, and the subways are empty in New York City and the streets are empty in Manhattan. And this is starting to happen all over the country. Our foundations of how we do our life is being shaken.
And I think for many, they're realizing how they've simply gone through the motions, right? They wake up, they do the same thing, they get into routine, and they repeat. And there's some excitement, there's some thrills along the way, there's birthdays to be celebrated, there's, milestones to be had, there's new cars to buy, marriages to occur. And these are all obviously important things, but I just get the sense, at least from the patient populations that I'm working with, that there's this like kind of aha moment where it's like this is just boring. This is just not fulfilling. This is not satisfying. And now here's the interesting part. They're at home. They have all the entertainment, all the amusement, right, that they could ask for. They're with their families, which I think for many people in America, they just want more time with their families. Now they have time with their families. And, there's a lot of things that are going really well. There's a lot of things that they have access to. All my adolescent patients, they can play as many video games as they want. Not all, sorry, parents out there. I know you're trying to limit that, but they have access to all these things. And yet they will sit there on the other end of a Zoom session and honestly share that they don't feel purposeful. They don't feel like they have anything to look forward to. And it's so hard because sometimes I try to instill hope. I try to help them explore that feeling. But when we talk foundation, that's not just something that sounds nice. Like, oh yeah, of course a building needs a foundation, but what is a foundation? And, I think it's a combination of beliefs and experiences and personal values and even family values that have been placed upon you. When I've been thinking about resilience theory, I think about how many, and this is more of like a parent-child dynamic, but how many kids need their parents to send them on a mission, to put them out in a direction and say, go, run in this direction and see if this might work. Now, this is not me saying, parents, you just need to force your kids to go be a lawyer, a doctor, anything like that. But it's like sometimes we as human beings, children especially, need to be pushed towards exploring personal values or personal
Mm-hmm.
or family values, and really understand what does that look like. And I'll give you an example. So I said earlier, legacy. I think people are forced to examine their legacy, and I think people do this ultimately when they're confronted with their own mortality. Because if I say, wow, if I'm a healthcare provider and I go into work and I have an increased chance of dying, right, or of contracting coronavirus and becoming very sick, and it's these scary times, what is the legacy that you leave behind? Because it's only when you examine that legacy, when you examine that work, that thing that testifies to what you've done in your life, does it actually help to justify why I would put myself, or why someone would put themselves in a place of risk. And I think about that. Like, think about, so we live in the New York metro area. We had something like 76,000 volunteers, medical volunteers, people that came out of retirement, people that said, you know what, if you can't pay me yet, that's fine. I'm going to go and I'm going to meet a need. And we say these people are heroes, and they are. And I think that there's something in them that says, I want to do something that is more significant and more important than the fear of my own mortality. And that's like legacy building things. It's, I want to be known for, and I want to accomplish this for a bigger purpose. And now I don't want to miss it. Legacy is not just pride. It's not just personal, like, look at me, I'm so great, build a statue in my name. But it's, wow, that's what I want to live up to as a young man. I want to look at that person who put their life on the line, who did something on behalf of others, and I say, wow, there's something different about them. And I think when we look at that, that starts to begin to form the foundation that I'm talking about, or that we're talking about, Dr. Hanna. So that's what I think about, is like this interconnectedness between, mission and values and foundation and legacy, and what are we doing and why and for what purpose? Is it just for us? Is it self-serving, or is it selfless and really for the benefit of those around us?
Yeah. And it's this, to go back to that part of the quote of the whole idea that typically most of us, regardless of our faith and belief system, tend to behave as if we're going to live on this earth forever. Right?
Yeah.
And I think this is true for a very large percentage of the population, and ourselves included, right? That we forget that. We forget the brevity of our life and kind of lose sight of what is significant.
Yeah.
And I think I pointed this out maybe in another video, that a lot of times we espouse a certain faith, right? A certain belief system that really should be guiding us to not do that. But we fall into the trap of, the whole idea of the cares of this world, right? That just the daily management of life consumes us, and we get so focused on that. When reality is, if we do our lives with the brevity of our life and our mortality in sight, not as a depressing thought, or as a kind of to be morbid, but actually the opposite, but as the backdrop to what matters. Right? And this leads to, and to be frank, Kyle, this leads to this whole idea of what do we believe happens after we die, right? Which is probably another long video we can do, but it's tied into that.
Yeah.
What, if we believe this is all there is, then that is going to certainly lead to a certain way of processing immortality, of potentially a hopelessness, or kind of leading to then the needing to pursue pleasure all the time, or things like that. So I think this is a quote that is worth thinking about and really understanding how it applies to your life.
Yeah.
So.
And if I may, because I definitely didn't answer your question for the second part of the quote, talking about the brevity of life, that brevity of life, that realization creates an urgency, right? So I think how we respond to that urgency is really significant. And sometimes out of that place of urgency, we want to do all the things that we wish we had but didn't yet do, like almost like a bucket list, right? I want to go enjoy all these pleasures. I want to go on these vacations. I want to spend this money. I want to live it up and live at large. Um, but that doesn't do anything to address that last point, which is,
Mhm.
when we are confronted with the brevity of life, we also have to face a belief system that maybe we've subscribed to, but maybe never really thought it out. And I think that that is something that I've actually seen in my practice come up a lot more. I've seen people really start to have faith conversations with their kids a whole lot more, thinking about parents specifically. But then I've also talked to a lot of the adolescents that are like, man, this is so scary. You know, I don't know if I'm going to go to college. I don't know if I'm going to ever have a job. I don't like, and it's all of this fear-based emotional reasoning that is coming from these insecurities that they have about their future. And then even some of them are getting to that point where they say, what if I die? Like, I don't want to go out.
Yeah.
What if I die? And that's like when you have to talk to a 16-year-old kid who has never expressed suicidal ideation or anything remotely self-injurious, that has never talked about the idea of death, that asks you a question like, what if I die? I'm afraid of this. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
okay, I'm afraid of it too, but that's not what you're saying. You're saying that you've never once pondered this before. You've never thought about this
Yeah.
as like, this is a concept. But these type of incidents, coronavirus, COVID-19, they force us to look at things that we've never given the time of day to talk about. And my big thing is that I want people to talk about this collectively and not just ponder it individually. So this is where you have the family conversations. This is where you talk to, religious leaders in your community, to your elders, to your parents and grandparents, and try to soak in that wisdom and that understanding, because these things matter, right? If there's this urgency, that urgency means it's not that you have to figure it out, but you definitely need to commit some time to
Right.
thinking about these things.
It's interesting that you said that. One of the things actually, and I'd like us to do, Kyle, is I would like actually perhaps to maybe get some people from the religious communities some pastors, maybe from some churches, because honestly, I'm being honest here. I feel like a lot of times in the mental health world, we're not equipped. We are not equipped in terms of the way we have been trained, and to be able to have these conversations. Frankly, I mean, these are existential conversations, these are faith conversations, these are but this stuff is the core of what drives a lot of anxiety and fear. And I think I'd like to bring on maybe some people who can join us in these conversations and give us their insights, because I think we desperately need those insights as a society, and as mental health practitioners. We fall into the trap a lot of times of just looking into the way we were trained and how we view people, and we're missing this big piece of spirituality and faith. So I think that's something we should definitely be doing, and perhaps we should be doing it soon.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, I know we've said this on the side many times, Dr. Hanna, that, our belief systems do matter, right?
Yeah.
What we believe ultimately shapes the way we feel and experience our own emotions. And because of that, we need to understand intimately what the unique beliefs are of every patient that we see, because I've seen a lot of anxiety come from belief systems. Well,
Yeah.
and I'll give you an example, and I hope this is an appropriate way of simplifying this down. But depending on what you believe about life after death, if you believe in a heaven, if you believe in an afterlife, if you believe in reincarnation, these are all similar but very different in so many ways. And it would be one thing for a patient to come in and say, oh, I'm okay with this because I believe I will go to heaven. And that becomes a source of hope and a source of comfort for this individual or these individuals in these uncertain times. And then there's other patients that I have that I know have had historically shared. It's like, I believe in reincarnation, so it really doesn't matter. Like, whatever, it's fine. And for me, again, and this is where it gets a little difficult, because you can have different belief systems and work together very well. But I was like, wow, so you have just a freedom to you, you're just going to kind of go and do whatever. Well, I'm not here to judge what's right and what's wrong, but one has a hopefulness that's like, you know what, if that's the case, that's the case. And another has a freedom and says, well, this is just a thing. It'll come, it'll go. If I die, I die. And it doesn't much matter to me. And, so there's different ways that people process things. And I think it's really important to understand what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't want to get into it, but I just think that it's so important to have these conversations because, that shapes how we act, how we behave, how we even share hope with our families and those around us. Even how we look at people in the midst of their pain around us. Like, how do you treat others ultimately flows from these belief systems. And let's be real, right? In coronavirus, in the wake of COVID-19, there's going to be a lot of pain. There's going to be a lot of brokenness. There's going to be a lot of trauma. There's going to be a lot of need. And we as human beings have to respond. And how we respond and in that urgency for which we do respond, I think is also going to be shaped by what we believe about ourselves, about our futures, about our roles in humanity and in our cultures, and really what we feel compelled or called to do. So, a lot more to be said.
We've got a lot more conversations we need to be having about belief systems and about processing suffering and pain.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a choice. So I think we're going to stop here, right? And thank you for tuning us in. And we'll be doing our best to continue having these conversations because they're important ones. And we don't want to just put our heads in the sand and just, just hope that this all goes away.
Absolutely.
So,
well, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, my pleasure. Dr. Hanna, thank you for making the time.
All right.